All right, so are you ready? Well, we finished Romans chapter 12 last week, and just in the way of reminder, not of what was in Romans chapter 12, but just in the way of the reminder of the division of the book of Romans, that the first 11 chapters are by nature doctrinal. They're doctrinal in nature. You will get sound biblical doctrine and true and deep understanding of sin. The law of sin and death, the curse of sin and death, the power of sin, and the need for righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. It is His righteousness that's imparted to us, not our own, and we learn that. That's key important doctrine, and the major doctrine is, as we learned over and over and repeated, that it communicates to us that we have sinned, that we have to recognize that we're a sinner, and once we recognize we're a sinner, what do? We then realize the need for a Savior. And so that's what the first 11 chapters are all about, and that's the biggest topic of all, sin and redemption. And then these last chapters, chapters 12 through 16, are practical in nature. They are living out our Christianity. And so that's the transition we had in Romans chapter 12. We saw that. It was speaking to that. Well, we're going to pick up at chapter 13 tonight. And chapter 13 begins with, in the first half, dealing with civil obedience. Now, I want people to hear the word tonight, because we as believers have a lot of responsibility for what's going on in our nation. The Bible teaches us to pray for our government leaders. We have a habit with our freedom of speech, which we love to exercise, of speaking against our government and its leaders as opposed to praying for our government and leaders. And we all can fall into this to some degree or the other, but I want us to hear the word of the Lord, because I do believe that there are things that are going on in this world and in our nation that are fulfillment of prophecy. I believe that the world stage is being set for the return of Jesus Christ, for the revealing of the Antichrist, and the beginning of a 7-year tribulation period. And things have to be in place. They have to be in order for that to happen. And so some of that has nothing to do with us, nothing to do with our believing and everything. But we can mitigate, believe me, negative things, even if it's not as a whole, around us. Job had a hedge of protection around him and his family. That was his realm of authority, his realm of faith, and God had that around him. It didn't go around his neighbors. It went around him and his family. Okay? And so those neighbors had to believe God and live by faith themselves. And a nation needs to do that. And leadership of a nation, when they lead it in a godly way, will produce manifold blessings of God. I mean, there's no doubt about it. All you have to do is study the history of the United States. One great source for that is Reverend David Barton, who is just a wonderful historian and has a lot of knowledge about the founding of our country and the original. He's an expert on the original documents and things, and it's something that can be good for us to study. But that was a nation that had leadership and people that the majority were believers, were passionate followers of Christ, and you can see the fruit of that. Well, we can do that. We can have an impact on our nation, even small Journey Church, small in numbers, but not small in power at all. And so we're going to look at civil obedience, Because what do you hear all the time in our culture? Civil disobedience. That's what it's about. That's the American way. Unless you're on the opposite side of the people who are in power. And we don't like that. But it actually is part of it is for people to have a voice. But there's a difference between exercising our free speech and our voice, our right of assembly, peaceable assembly, and having our voice heard and expressing our will, and what is termed civil disobedience. And yet we think of that as a really great and noble thing, and yet what does the Bible have to say about it? Because what could civil disobedience be? You could think of Martin Luther King. You could think of stories of people who refused to do it. I just went totally blank. Who refused to sit down on the bus? Rosa Parks. I can't believe I couldn't think of her name. That was an act of disobedience of a local ordinance, and had an impact. And we think of that, and we think of it in a noble and heroic way. But the Bible has something to say to us about this, and I want us to have a balanced teaching on it. I want us to have an open heart and an open mind to be renewed to the Word of God and understand authority, because we truly do live really in a rebellious way. It's kind of, again, the American way. We're the ones who rebelled against England and started our own thing, and we fight for what we have, and we get to embracing some of these spirits about that, and they can be used against us and turned in a negative way, and so we'll say, I don't care. I don't think that speed limit ought to be what it is. Oh no, I know I touched on toes already tonight. But I don't think the speed limit ought to be 25 miles an hour in front of this church and on Missouri Avenue. That's definitely not it's wide enough. There's room enough. There's no need for that to be 25 miles per hour, so I'm going to go 35. I think that's about a 35 mile an hour kind of a street, and that's just what I'm going to do. I refuse to do that. As we study tonight, we're going to see that's civil disobedience. It's disobeying the law, but God's calling us to do something different. Let's go to verse number 1 in Romans 13. Let every soul, how many of you are a soul, a living being? That's the context of that. I know we're a spirit that lives in a body and has a soul, but biblically, a biblical term is that, we even talk about that in the natural. On a ship or on an airplane, what do they say? There's 120 souls on board. And so we get the context of what that is. Let every soul, every being, every person be subject to the governing authorities. What governing authorities? The ones you're under. The ones you're under. For there's no authority except from God. And the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Now I'm reading the Bible. I'm not reading political commentary. It says in the Bible, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. That's the authorities that we find ourselves under. We could say local, state, and federal. For there's no authority except from God. See, God created human government. God ordained human government. We cannot function in this world without government, without a higher authority that regulates us to a degree. And so it qualifies that to make sure we don't miss it. There's no authority except from God. And the authorities that exist, not that should be, not that we wish would be, not that we hope would be, not the authority in this country or that country, but not our country. The authorities that exist are appointed by God. So let's look at that for a moment. If it is of God, it is of God, it is His order that there should be human government and human laws. He made it that way. And if He made it that way, then that's the way it needs to be. That's the way it should be. That's the proper way. But I want you to think about it. Well, what about, that's just the devil trying to enter in right away. Or just human. That's why Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean onto your own understanding. We will try to rationalize. We will try to figure out things. And you know what humans do? Almost inevitably, we figure out a better way than God's way. Because that's the sin nature. That's the way we are. It's the way we're wired. It's in there. And so when we start to say, well, that doesn't mean the current government, or that doesn't mean the last government, it amazes me how some people of the previous administration and the president, for some people, could never do anything wrong. The greatest president in the history of presidents, nothing he could do is wrong. And there are people who, under this current president, feel exactly the same way. I just saw a headline, didn't read the article. Frankly, I got to get into catching up on some news because Prophecy Update snuck up on me, and it's this Sunday. And just to give you a few headlines, before we talk about the image of Nebuchadnezzar for our teaching for that, got to catch up on a few, just give you some stuff that's going on. But I do scan headlines in case something pops up, and I save it in a folder so that I can reference that. That's how I do that. And one of the headlines I saw was that somebody in the administration said that President Joe Biden, and again, like I say, I like to say President Joe Biden or President Donald Trump or President Barack Obama and so on. That's their title. And in the military, we said, General. George Eisenhower? What's Eisenhower's first name? I'm going blank on everything tonight. Dwight Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower. But we didn't say Dwight. We'd say General Eisenhower if we refer to him, General Dwight Eisenhower. And so we respect and give honor to titles. We're going to see that's biblical. So Joe Biden, somebody in his administration, said he's the greatest president that we have ever had in our nation. And some people who felt that way about the previous president are saying, what? These people are out of their minds. But see, the people that were hearing some of the words from the people in the previous administration, and it's a constant battle, a constant turmoil. Hello, welcome. You're welcome to come in and join us. He's in the basement if you come through here and through this door and then just go through the hallway and down the stairs. Yeah, he's in the youth room. It's good to see you again. So, not at all. No problem at all. So when we look at that, there are people on both sides and people get in division. We have people who have had families break up, friendships break up, even married couples have broken up over their political differences. And yet, can that be managed? Can we respect one another for our differences? We did it in my lifetime. That was the way it was. We used to think, like we say the Southern saying, "Oh, bless their darling heart." We're saying they don't know what they're thinking, what they're doing. Bless their heart. But that's the way they think, and we just recognize that, and we agreed to disagree, respected one another, and we ought to be able to do that without getting super engaged. But no matter how you feel about the present leadership in the country, we're supposed to be subject to that leadership. And because God gave human government, He established human authority and appointed governments. You say, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. Well, that's, again, just go to Proverbs 3:5. If you struggle with any revelation, any of what God has to say, go to Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Just trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not onto your own understanding. There's things we just may not understand. But God understands. I'm going to try to help you understand a little bit because of the revelation that God has given us and that I'm going to try to expound on. But think of it like this. Why would God create government? Because with a fallen world, with human beings, again, when I talked about the sin nature, how many of you know, yeah, that is true. That's the way we are. I don't think it should be 25 miles an hour. And so it doesn't matter what you think. Is it 25 miles an hour? Then that's what you go. And so we recognize this. God ordered human government and human laws because if we didn't have them, there would be no order, no security, and no progress for mankind. If there wasn't human government, including governments that we think are awful, we would have instability and anarchy. We would have, without the controlling of government and trying to channel and focus, limits on people and their tendencies to do wrong, the world would have been destroyed. See, think of it like when God said, when we read in the book of Genesis about the Tower of Babel, that God said, when they're in unity, when they've set their mind to do something and they're in agreement, there's nothing they can't do. They'll do that. They were building the tower. They wanted to build a tower to heaven. They were saying, we're going to establish this. God didn't say build it. And so God confounded their languages. That's why we have the word Babel. It means to have languages confounded. And so it sounds like babble. It sounds like nonsense. Because when He confounded their languages, they all sounded to one another like they were speaking Babel. Because next thing you know it, different people were speaking different languages. Well, the ones that understood the others, people who might have been speaking, I know the languages were different at that time, but English went off with some English people because they could understand each other, and then they formed community and established government. But if we didn't, if we could build the tower, and God says they could do it, could we not build destructive things and just because we don't like the way things going, we just destroy the world? See, other human governments established by God also impact other governments. And we can look in our lifetime at times that there was risk of destruction because after the creation, for instance, of the atomic bomb, there was a philosophy of what they called universal destruction. And this philosophy said that people have a self-interest to stay alive. And for the most part, that's true. People, we try to stay alive, don't we? We'll do everything we can to just hang on and stay alive. If somebody found a map to that said there's a fountain of youth. How many movies have been made out of it? Novels been written, books, TV shows about the fountain of youth. But I tell you what, if somebody found a map and it said there could actually be a fountain of youth, you would have people racing to find that fountain of youth, just like in the movies, because we want to go on. And so we fight for that. We have that instinct. So this doctrine of mutual, I said it wrong, I think. I don't know what I said, but it's mutual assured destruction. The doctrine of mutual assured destruction is that if you start sending over all of your atomic bombs at us, we're going to send ours back at you, and both of our countries will be totally gone. And if it's multiple, then the whole world will be destroyed. And so we don't do that, and it's a restraining force. And we show our military power and our military strength to control. And the powers in our history of nations that become what they call nuclear powers, the U.S. being the first, and then others followed. And we have, not a lot of nations to this day that are nuclear powers, because the nuclear powers try to keep other nations that are less disciplined and less inclined for that. They try to put constraints on there. So you see governments working in within themselves and over the people, but also interacting with one another to keep some order in the world. Because how many of you, again, would agree that our world would probably be destroyed if there wasn't the human governments? When we see the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things that have went on in our history since the creation of the weapons we have, it's been serious. And I'm not an expert on those things, and I'm not preaching politics, and I'm not preaching history, but I'm trying to give us an understanding of human government, why God set it up, and why it is of God. Say, well, the United States is of God because He created it, but China's not of God. They're our enemy. Well, no, He created human government. All governments that exist, the authorities exist, are established by God. It doesn't say that they're the way that God would desire for them to be. Do you understand that? Do you get that difference? Because, again, of the sin nature and the ability for us to be corrupt and for politicians, governing leaders to be corrupted, human government is imperfect. But it's better than no government because it would be chaos. It would be destruction. There would be no restraint. And the Bible speaks of things like casting off restraint. We have the potential to do great evil. And we may want to say amen to that or oh me, but it's still the truth. We have the potential to do great evil. All of us will have to, if we search our hearts, say, there are moments, there are times that I have just horrible thoughts. When we get frustrated or put out, thank God for restraining forces. Okay? So there'd be no order, no security, no progress among mankind. So imperfect as they often be, and they often are, I should say, in some instances, they're even oppressive and unjust. The Chinese government, in my opinion, is very oppressive. It is very unjust. It is cruel to Christians and frankly to Muslims and any religious people, any believers. It's a government based on atheistic belief, and so it is opposed to any faith. They kill and imprison Christians over there, but they kill and imprison the Uyghur Muslims and others in vast numbers as well. It's cruel. And, we could say that of other governments that we know of. Look at some of the freedoms that came in the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, and we've left. And they are taking away women's rights that they had been given, and it's oppressive, and it can be quite cruel. But this doesn't differentiate between that because it still has a restraining force. So I want you to look back in recent history and think about some of those Middle East kind of battles. Because, and this is just for a perspective, to make us understand why there is human government, why it is of God, and why we need to recognize that and work within that. When we started getting involved in some foreign wars, not out of defense and things like that, but out of like nation building and trying to change nations, it doesn't always go well. We defeated Imperial Japan, and the Japanese people are a people by their nature respectful of authority and submissive in their nature to authority. So when we became the authority, even though they fought ferociously against us, they submitted to that and cooperated under that and adopted the kind of Western governing style and thrived and prospered and are a great ally of ours. Amazingly, they were an ally of ours. It's World War II isn't even 100 years ago. But, when it was just decades. I remember, when I graduated high school in 1982, Japan had been a long time they became an ally, as did Germany, by the way. Now theirs is we submit to government under a rigid thing, and they aren't submissive by nature, but submissive by government. And so they'll do that. And both of them, in submitting, different kind of personality type, nature, culture, let's say like the different cultural views of authority, but both submissive to authority, were able to, under the authority of the allies that defeated them, turn into allies themselves. But some other nations have not, because not everybody does. It doesn't always work that way. And we have made some mistakes, in the opinion of some people. Again, I'm not an expert on these historical things in government. I'm just trying to give us perspective. I want to take our time because we fight this. And all we do is find ourselves complaining, murmuring and complaining and moaning and groaning. And, frankly, what we sound like, including the church in America, we sound like national Israel that we say, man, I would never be like that. I would never act that way. And we're just the same way, aren't we? Are you getting it? Are you understanding? So when we defeated one dictator, even dictators, brutal dictators, still have an order. And when we defeated one dictator, what we started to discover, and people began to talk like this, if you take that one out, you don't know what's going to come in place of that one. And isn't that true? I'm not being conservative, I'm not being progressive, I'm not being Republican, I'm not being Democrat, I'm not being libertarian, I'm not being independent. I'm just trying to, perspective-wise, understand human government and why it is here and why it is it's established by God, because it would be. Have you ever seen in some nations, including our own, riots? People that just get angry about something and just, in the Old West, we used to call it what? Lynch mobs. Remember, we would just, they'd be mad at somebody, they just decided they were guilty before they had a fair trial, and they would have a lynch mob. You watch any number of Westerns, and it's all about that. And John Wayne comes out there with the shotguns, and I bet you step off. I can't shoot y'all, but I'm going to shoot those of you right here in the front. And they were the leaders instigating it, and everybody broke up, right? Because you witness in that dramatic movie human government exercising its authority, and people get back into the place of submission. That's government. And so we've seen that, and in some nations it can be that way. And we'll sometimes root for it. We'll say, oh, I'm rooting for that they'll take over their government and turn it over and things like that, and understand, and it's the ways of mankind. It happens. And sometimes good can come out of a rebellion. Just imagine, the Chinese people when they Tiananmen Square, and when they were trying to do that, if it would have caught hold, and they'd done like and us with Great Britain, with England. And so I'm not, here declaring positive and negative. I'm just giving us perspective that every government, no matter what it is established by God. Even oppressive and imperfect and unjust governments do still exist for a purpose of good, and form part of a divine order of the government of the world. And I hope I explain that in a way. I know this doesn't sound totally like a sermon, but it is a sermon. Because, see, the Word of God is supposed to be applicable to our life. That's what these last chapters are. How do I apply this to my life? How do I apply this to the way I'm living every day? And when we look at how governments even can restrain one another, it can keep the world from being destroyed. That's the big debate over Iran and nuclear weapons there, or any other country that say, oh man, they're not ready to handle it. If you watch science fiction, it still doesn't change. They have the prime directive in Star Trek. You never interfere with a evolving culture. You let them, when they first start to learn, space travel and all that, then they'll go start to observe them, but they're not supposed to interfere with them. You've got to let them have their own natural development, and we're like, yeah, but we don't want them to fight the same wars that we fought. They got to get there to get where you're at. They got to go through that process. You got to, it's leaving that alone. It will happen, and you can watch that if you ever watch any of the science fiction type movies. It's not just Star Trek. Because we really, when we write literature, make movies and TV shows and so on and so forth, what we're really doing is recognizing government, authority. I'm not saying there's not good and bad. There are. But authority in and of itself is better than anarchy, because pure evil would be unrestrained. Does that help? So in this sense, all the governments, say on the planet Earth, are from God and ordained by God, of God. And in submitting them to them, according to the Word of God, we're submitting to God. See, when this tells us in verse 1, let every soul be subject or submitted to the governing authority, then that means it's a biblical instruction that God is giving us. And so when I obey the law, when I submit to my government, I'm obeying God. And the other side of that coin, if I'm disobeying, and we'll get into this, I'm disobeying God. I really want to give the perspective, and then we'll just get these 7 verses knocked out here. Let's go to verses 2 through 5, because now it's going to pick up on that. Does everybody get where I'm coming from? Does everybody recognize that human government really is a benefit to the world, even though it's imperfect? Humanity is a blessing, even though humanity is imperfect. Okay? Romans 3, 2 through 5. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God. So that wasn't just Pastor Race talking. That's the Apostle Paul talking, who's being anointed by the Holy Spirit to write this. Whoever resists the authority that exists, that they're under, resists the ordinance of God. So to disobey the authority or resist the authority is to resist God, His ordinance, His law. So those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. And it's not speaking in the original language in the text of the judgment of God. It is the judgment of God because He set this in place. He established it. But it's the judgment of those that rule over you. Let's go back to Missouri Avenue, and Brenda's going 35, 40 miles an hour because she's decided that 25 is just way too slow to get to Aldi. The street's wide enough and smooth enough. There's no reason we can't go 35, 40 miles an hour. Well, when she does that and the red flashing lights, the cherry balls, are going off and everything, she's going to receive judgment. She's going to receive a ticket, amen? The judgment will come because you've resisted. Verse 3, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be afraid of the authority? See, rulers, by design of human government, God's best is they're good, and they're in line with His word and His will, but they are good. And they're not a terror to people who are doing good. So you don't have to be afraid of the police. You don't have to, panic every time you see a police officer on the side of the road if you are driving the speed limit. Be aware of the rules of the road and follow them, and you don't have to be thinking like that. I set my cruise control. I went to Poplar Bluff the other day and had to go to a doctor's appointment, and it's 65 miles an hour, so I had my speedometer set for 65 miles an hour. As a matter of fact, I'd set it on like the high side of it because there was like several, those speedometer things, and if you ever notice when you go through those, it's always just slightly under, sometimes like one under. So I'll go like 60, 65, like lines on the high side of that to 61 because it's actually 66, so it's actually 65. But I do that, and so I'm driving down the road, and I did see a police officer on the side of the road, and I didn't slam my brakes on because I was being submissive to the governing authority. I was obeying God. I like to have fun with people when I deal with this and say, if I was going 70 miles an hour, I'm not submissive to God. And in its context, specifically, I come under the judgment. They're a terror to those. You're afraid that you're going to get caught when you're doing what? Law breaking. But you're not afraid if you're not law breaking. So they're not a terror to you if you do good. Even oppressive governments and things like that, if you really live a Christian life, now there are some that exist that persecute Christians. I'm not denying that reality. That's the fallen nature of this world. But it's still better than chaos. I know this is heavy stuff, but it's simple truth that we just don't like to hear sometimes. The terror is to those who are lawbreakers. So it says, do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Who wants to be unafraid of the human government, the authority over us? I don't want to be afraid of my government, my authority. This is what it says. Do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same. Just do what you're supposed to do, and you'll get praise from them. For he is listen to this. This is the Bible. This isn't Ray. You say, Pastor, you're preaching, it sounds like politics and stuff, and for he, the governing authority, the president or the mayor or whatever governing authority you're looking at, He is God's minister to you for good. God's minister. The word minister doesn't mean just preacher from behind a pulpit. It means somebody who serves and helps. Okay, so He's God's minister, His servant for you. But you see God in this? He's an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And don't they do that? How many of you don't like everything about our government and what it's doing right now? Now, you can raise your hand to that question no matter who's the president and whatever, because we don't like everything every one of them are doing, right? So that's not political, it's just the truth, right? But how many of you know that no matter what governments we have, how many of you said, it's the end of the world? People said that when I'll just go back a few, President Obama became president. It's over. It's over. Woe is me. It's over. And he's not my president. And then we got a president from the opposite party, and the people from the opposite party of him, it's the end of the world. I mean, they literally believe it's the end of the world. They write it. See, it's just getting worse and worse. Now we have the opposite party in again, and there are people from the opposite party of the current opposite party, and they literally, if you listen, are saying things like, it's the end of the world. It's the end of our government. It's just progressively, that's the way people are saying. But this says that they avenge wrath on those who practice evil. And no matter who it is and whether you agree or not, how many of you can say, thank God for the laws of our land and the general order that our country has lived under? The blessings, the freedom that it produces. Because what is the saying in America? We are a nation of laws. We're a nation of laws. And that's why we have had some of the success we have. And then verse 5, therefore you must be subject not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. Not just because you fear the judgment that will come from doing wrong by the government, and more broadly, yes, the judgment of God. Because what happens when we sin? What does sin do with us and God? It separates us. If we're willful, we're rebellion against God, we're tying His hands, and what's happening? We're opening the door to what? The devourer, the devil. So if we're disobeying and resisting and fighting and complaining and cursing, then we're going to be hindered in our own life. And then when the government comes calling, we want to complain and say, God, but God. It says, but so do it out of a like a reverential fear almost, out of a fear. I don't want to be, I want to obey. I don't want the trouble. I don't want an IRS audit. So I have an accountant do my taxes every year because I don't want to be audited. It doesn't guarantee I won't. Well, for many years, I've had an accountant just do it, and I pay them because they know it's their job to keep up with any current laws. And as a self-employed person and as a minister, there's various things. And it's like, I don't want to have to spend my time keeping up with that and go wrong, so I'm just going to let somebody else take care of it. And so I don't fear it. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but I don't fear it. And I don't fear it even if I do get that letter. It'd be like, oh, what a bummer. This isn't going to be pleasant. It'll be like having an enema or something. But knowing that He's done that, I will feel confident, that it'll go well. And knowing that I put the effort in, I believe that their response will go well, if that would ever occur. See, resisting the governing authority will bring its judgment on the person who resists it. But doing what is good, and it says, so not only out of that fear, but out of conscience sake. You want to have a peace in your mind. You want to have, your conscience clear. Because how many of you get a guilty conscience when you're sneaking around doing wrong? Well, am I going to get caught for this? How many of you ever done? You just know you did wrong, and now you're thinking, oh man, am I going to get caught for it? God, please don't let me get caught for it. Well, you open the door. Whether that happens or not, God's not intervening in that. A judgment's going to come. What you sow, you reap, period. If it's found out it's going to happen, and you just ask for mercy, ask for God's favor, and Him to move on them to have some compassion. But if I commit a bad crime, I expect I'll go to jail. Period. God just won't make it go away. All right, where did I leave off? Resisting that, but doing good. Will bring the praise or approval of the authority. Now, I want to give you a real quick example. We're at the end of our hour. Real quick example of Paul respecting a human authority. In this case, it's the religious authority. But in their authority in that time, their religious authority really had a lot of governmental backing from the Roman government in it as well. But it's still a form of government, human government. It's what we might call canonical government and that sort of thing. It is, but it is a human government. We have leadership in the church, and everything. It's human government, but God's our ultimate head. So Paul, in Acts 23, verse 1 through 5, very quickly, Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, "Men, brethren, I've lived in all good conscience before God to this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth, smack him in the face, and they struck him on the mouth. And then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." What I tell you about sometimes we react, don't we? We respond. It's like, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you to sit and judge me according to law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? So he rebukes this guy that told them to smack him, and they did smack him. So he might have a bloody lip, and he's sore, and he smarts off at him. But then it says, and those who stood by said, "Do you reveal the high priest?" Ananias was the high priest. Then Paul said, "I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." So he's like, my bad, in our terminology. My bad. I wouldn't have done that. Because the Bible says, I'm rebuking him for doing something, commanding something contrary to law, and here I'm doing something contrary to law. I wouldn't have done that. See it? And it says, you will not speak evil of the ruler of the people, no matter whether they have a D or an R or a L or I next to their name as a political elected official. Don't speak evil. Don't be cursing them. See the Word of God? It is the theory of laws of all civilized governments. Some of this is coming out of commentary. To uphold justice and only punish what is wrong. And for the most part, they do. For the most part, they do. Human government is upholding justice and punishing wrong to maintain order. The principles of the Roman law were just, and Paul personally in his life found some protection from its officers and tribunals when religious hypocrites, religious zealots, religious activists were trying to hinder, imprison, and even kill him. And he found government of Rome, protection under the government of Rome. And so we see they're here for a reason. Everybody say government's here for a reason. I can't believe I spent this much time. I can't believe it's already over. So, thinking back to a police officer and being stopped for that speed limit, being stopped by a police officer. Brenda's doing it on purpose because she says it ought not to be 35. Police officer stops her. When we first started pastoring here, I was stopped by a police officer on Missouri Avenue. And it was because I was doing about 35, because it just felt like a 35-mile-an-hour road. And that was the flow of traffic. Frankly, I'd been coming here for, we'd been in the building, and we were doing the remodel. So I was driving here every day, working on it, and got used to that flow of traffic and stuff. But I got stopped, and the police officer said, "Do you know how fast you're going?" And I said, "I thought I did, but no, sir, what was I doing?" He said, "You're doing 35. And I'm thinking, so? He says, "Do you know what the speed limit here is?" I said, "Well, actually, this is a new road for me to be driving on. I've never really driven it until here just recently, because I started pastoring a church there. So I'm just, I've been coming down here, and I've just been going what everybody seems to go." He said, "Well, the speed limit here is actually 25. So from now on, make sure you go 25. Now, if Brenda, when the officer comes up to her and says, "Don't you have better things to do? Well, isn't there criminals you can catch? Well, you're trying to oppress me," and she's belligerent, she's rude, and she's disobedient, disrespectful. Do you think her experience, that officer said, "From now on, just watch it now that you know"? I said, "Okay, absolutely, officer." But if she acted the way I just described, and I know she never would, but say she acted the way she described, do you think she'd get out of that situation with the same result that I did? So we see the context. We see what this is speaking to us about. And we're told to obey whatever authority we're under to avoid the wrath of the human authority. We're to do it for conscience sake. We're doing it because the authority is right. To obey authority is right because God ordained human authority. Whether we like it or not, that's the way it is. And you ought to like it. You ought to like it, because it would be really bad if it wasn't. To disobey would be to not do the right thing. And I just want to kind of wrap up our thoughts with this. Paul's writing this while Nero is the emperor of Rome. Their authority was Roman government, for the most part, was a fair and a just system of government. To this day, our Senate and other things are based on the Grecian and then Roman governments that evolved. The Roman government, the Roman Senate, and so on. And we're based on that. And so for the most part, it's good, even though you had a very brutal leader of that government. But Paul's writing all of this under that rule. And it was that Roman government that ultimately ended up executing Paul in the end. And Paul didn't complain about it one time. He embraced the conclusion of his life with an excitement about what was before him. It's just a better way of living, don't you think? And just because somebody else isn't doing it doesn't mean we ought to not be doing it. Amen? Now, I was supposed to do verse 6 and 7, which talks about paying taxes. I'll do it real quick next week when we start, because I want to switch over to the second half. But let me just give you a preview. It's no different than the speed limits and the other laws. You pay taxes. You pay it. Is it God's will? Yes. That's the answer. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for challenging us with your word. I thank you, Lord, for helping just remind us, because I know I can't watch politics in the way that I used to. I just can't watch the strife and the turmoil and honestly, Lord, you know my nature. I don't want to hear things that I don't disagree with just to rile me up. What's the point in feeding on this stuff and letting ourselves be moved by that? Lord, let us rather invest our time in seeking you, your kingdom, you first, your kingdom, your way of doing and being right, your righteousness, and then you can let everything else fall into place. So I'd rather spend my time not knowing every nitty-gritty detail about every single thing that's going on, but to just pray for our leaders, our president, and every leader underneath him to just be submitted to you, Lord, to have their heart turned by you, to choose to do good and not evil, to choose to do right and not wrong, to be a blessing for us as a people and as a nation and not a curse. I pray, Lord, that they'll be successful in doing good. I pray, Lord, that you will surround them with wisdom, with wise counselors, and help them to have eyes to see and ears to hear things that are bad because of their authority, because of their office. You do that. You can impress upon their heart because of that office these things, and I pray that you'll make our president sensitive to that. And I thank you because of it. We'll live a quiet and peaceable life, and we give you praise for it in Jesus' name. Amen.